We are live yet again here on the Hoplite channel. Thanks for coming by, everybody. Appreciate it as always. Good to see you. And if you are here, you clicked on the video. What is a false flag? Right. So I've done this series of videos now centered on the war in Ukraine between Ukrainian forces and Russia. And I've noticed in the past week and a half or so, certain incidents have occurred in the country of Ukraine, and they are of very dubious nature. And I was thinking back to the famous quote by Sun Tzu, who authored The Art of War. I did a 3-part series on that, by the way. You might want to go back and check it out, just saying. But he said, warfare is the Tao of deception. What did he mean by that? Well, the Tao is the way, and the way of warfare is through deception. And what does that mean? That means that the overcoming of your enemy depends upon your ability to deceive him. That seems kind of dishonorable, right? But it's true. Warfare is simply what you're capable of versus what I'm capable of, right? If we both agree to the same set of rules and we fight within that defined set, well then our qualities within that set of rules will determine the victor. But if there are no rules, and I can do whatever I want, and you can do whatever you want, well then it strictly comes down to who is capable of doing what the other is not. And Sun Tzu saying that the Tao of warfare is deception. That is making your enemy think that you're weak when you're actually strong. Making your enemy think that you're strong when you happen to be weak. There are no rules. The deception that you practice is just another means of overcoming your enemy and winning a war. Von Clausewitz would most likely agree with this. But what is going on right now in Ukraine is a series of events that appear to be creating a new fog of war. And I titled this episode, What is a False Flag? Because we could perhaps be seeing different types of false flags in Ukraine. I'm not saying that's what we're seeing. I'm saying that is what we could be seeing. So last week, over a week ago, there was a war crime, quote unquote, uncovered in a suburb of Kyiv. I believe it was just west. I won't say the name of a town. It starts with a B. If you haven't heard about it yet, you can just Google Ukraine, Russia, war crimes, suburb, Kyiv, starts with a B, you'll find it. And the media was saying that there were several incidents of civilians who were executed or just shot fleeing, and it was perpetrated by Russian forces. A lot of people now are saying, well, this doesn't make any sense. The Russian forces were just withdrawing from Kyiv so that they could regroup with forces in the east. Why would they commit these war crimes just to leave them for anyone to find and then move further eastward? But that's the story. A couple days ago, a missile was launched at a train station in Ukraine. Again, this might have been near the city of Kyiv, I'm not positive, but I believe 30 civilians were killed in the missile strike, which is awful. Immediately, the Ukrainian Defense Forces and the Western media are saying that it was a missile attack launched by Russian forces against Ukrainian civilians. However, a part or fragment of the missile was recovered, and I believe it's a Tochka-U style missile, which is a Soviet-era missile. Who has Soviet-era missiles in their inventory? Ukraine. In fact, I believe Ukrainian forces are using only, at this point, Soviet-era missiles. Who else has Soviet-era missiles in their inventory? Well, Russia would, right? Because Russia controlled the Soviet Union during the Cold War, so of course they would probably still have some Tochka-U's in their inventory. Ukraine is saying Russia launched this Tochka-U Soviet-era missile and killed their civilians. Russia is saying, why would we use old technology, a Tochka-U, which we haven't used in combat in over 15 years, when we have better missiles in our inventory for the same exact purpose? it was probably you who fired upon your own civilians so you could blame us. Ukraine is saying, why would we fire on our own civilians? Russia's saying, why indeed? Well, this is why I think the topic of today's episode is poignant, because we could be seeing false flags. And I want to cover this. And I don't have enough subscribers yet, so this probably will get by the YouTube algorithm and won't get nuked. But we'll see. Because I'm towing the line right now, but I felt like doing this episode because it's fresh in my mind and it's going on right now in Ukraine. So let's rewind and first talk about what is a false flag, where did it come from, and what are some historical examples that we can look to see what's going on in the current conflict that might shed some light and possibly get us to step back and reevaluate things versus just believing the first story that comes out. All right, let's do a definition here. And I took some notes so that I could keep this together. Okay, false flag, noun. And it is an attack or other hostile action that obscures the identity of the participants carrying out the action while implicating another group or nation as the perpetrator. Right. So it is you, or perhaps an ally of yours, carrying out an attack against a target or a group of people, and doing it in a manner that obscures the identity of who is committing the attack. But then later coming to out in the open in the public and saying, well, this was obviously an attack done by so-and-so group. They've always hated this target. They targeted this place, these people, so it's got to be them, right? It makes sense. And that the public opinion will start to formulate its own idea of what happened based upon that narrative and agree with you that the people who you are blaming for the attack are the actual perpetrators. But in truth, it's either yourself or someone else. This happens all the time, right? This is a tactic used in warfare. It's a dishonorable tactic, but there are many historical examples, and we'll cover some, where if an army believes they're losing the narrative, as in they're losing the propaganda war, they will commit an attack against their own people, their own forces, to redirect public opinion back in their favor and against their opponent. It's normally done to give someone political motivation, or at the very least boost morale in a very negative way, but to reinvigorate the war effort on your side and to turn the tide. Okay, so where does the historical coinage, where does false flag come from? And I gave you a little hint here with the Jolly Roger, yar. So the historical coinage comes from a practice in the Caribbean, and this would have been, the pirate age, the age of piracy in the Caribbean and elsewhere, the glory of the high seas. So if you're a fan of Pirates of the Caribbean, movies like that, this is where this term came from. And what pirates would do is they would often outfit their ships to look like merchant ships, or to look like fishermen's vessels or what have you. And they would often dress up their crew to look similar. And they would hoist a flag from their stern that was a friendly nation in the area, whether it be Great Britain, the Netherlands, Spain, France, what have you. And another vessel that shared the same nationality as this merchant vessel would see them through their telescope and say, "Oh, hey, it's the Mary Beth. Let's go over and see if she's having trouble. It looks like they have a problem with their mainsail." And the pirates would either disable their vessel, or they would wave or sound an alarm that there's distress or something. They would hatch a trap. And then when the unsuspecting boat came close enough, they would open the gun ports and fire upon the vessel that came to see what the issue was. And at this point, they would drop the flag that they had raised falsely, and they would raise the Jolly Roger, and then it was game on. If they got enough positive hits with their cannon fire on the unsuspecting boat, they possibly could cripple it, or to disorient the crew long enough so that the pirate vessel could reach their gunwale and board them. And then they would take their booty and plunder and kill everybody on board or take them prisoner or what have you. Blackbeard was famous for this, and he was notorious in this era for these kind of tactics. This was the false flag tactic, right? You raise the flag of your enemy, and when your enemy comes thinking you're one of the good guys, one of their team, you spring the trap and you shoot on them, and then you hoist your flag, and you have caught them by surprise. You have deceived them. A great example of this, if you're into movies and cinema, is Master and Commander. And in that movie, Jack Aubrey, who's Russell Crowe, he is the captain of a British man of war, I believe. And they're after a French man of war that is among the best in its fleet. And it's kind of like, it's almost like a Moby Dick kind of story, because that's his Moby Dick. And he's after this French ship. And the ship that they're after outclasses them. It's better equipped, has more guns, it can sail faster. So how is he going to take this ship that it outclasses him? Well, he concocts a false flag. They raise the French flag, I believe, or maybe they raise the flag of a friendly nation to Napoleonic France at the time. And then when the French frigate comes within range, they train and shoot all of their port side guns at the main mast of this French ship. Enough of the cannon fire hits the main mast that it breaks it, and they're crippled. They cannot set sail away from Aubrey's ship now, because if their mainsail is destroyed, it's basically like you're racing a car and you knocked out both of its rear tires. It's going to be fast, but not nearly as fast as it was with both tires. And having only 2 good tires, it's essentially crippled, because if you have 4 good tires, you're going to beat it. And what happens is they board the ship and they take it. It's actually the culmination of the movie. It's a good movie. I'd highly recommend it. But that's a great example of a false flag. Right. So, moving into the real world past this was the real world, the pirate age, but moving to the modern examples of false flags, what are a few that we know of, maybe not perhaps conclusively, but people have sort of figured out through the passage of time that, yeah, these were false flags, and we can call them that. Well, let's look at a few World War II era examples, and I put the era between 1930 and 1945. So, let us go to the Manchurian Incident, and I'll put some images up here so you can follow as I read. The Manchurian Incident was an event where a Japanese officer detonated explosives next to a railway line owned by a Japanese company. But the explosive was too small, and trains were able to safely pass over the section. Despite this, Japan used the incident to withdraw from the League of Nations and decided to invade northeastern China. Right? So what was Japan doing in the Manchurian Incident? Well, they had a Japanese officer who put explosives on a railway line and was going to use that tragedy, although he probably didn't mix the bomb correctly or didn't know how much he needed, and the explosion didn't destroy the rail line. What was supposed to happen was the rail line was supposed to be destroyed enough that a Japanese train would derail. That would be a national incident for Japan, and then they could definitely use the tragedy and the deaths that would have resulted as a precursor to invade China. But they ended up doing it anyway. The bomb didn't work, but they said, hey, there was a bomb, okay? Thank God nobody died, right? But it was definitely China, so we're going to invade. They withdrew from the League of Nations, and that was the Manchurian Incident. We'll go to Europe across the pond. 1933, the Reichstag Fire. And at the time, Adolf Hitler was installed as the Chancellor of Germany. 1 month after he became chancellor, a fire broke out at the German Reichstag, which today is the Bundestag. A man by the name of Marvin van der Lubbe, a Dutch communist, was blamed. And I think they actually ended up killing that guy. Nevertheless, Chancellor Hitler used the event to issue the Reichstag Fire decree, which suspended civil liberties and began the pursuit of communist conspirators in Germany. It was determined years later that van der Lubbe was actually mentally ill and suffered from manic depression, and it was believed that he was most likely set up by German intelligence officers within the Nazi Party to start the fire. Okay, so here we have a great World War II example. Adolf Hitler is installed as chancellor, but he doesn't have total control of the country. So what happens? Nazi intelligence finds this Martin van der Lubbe, who's a communist, he's a Dutch communist, and they convince him to join in this conspiracy where he's going to burn down the Reichstag, right? So this poor guy is a manic depressive, and he's a communist to boot, which is like a twofer. They find this guy and like, that's our patsy. Martin's going to take the fall. We're going to tell him he's part of this, 5 or 6 man group. Fritz is going to go there, Hans is going to go there, and Martin, you're going to go over here, and you're going to start the fire in this wing, and we're all going to rally up back here after it's over. Well, what happened is Martin probably went in there alone. All the other guys were part of the Nazi intelligence agencies, or Nazi intel agencies, the SS, and after it burned down, they caught him. And what did they do as a result? Well, they said, hey, communists are here. They're in Germany. They burned down our beloved Reichstag. Let's suspend civil liberties just for the time being, right? Just for a little bit. Okay? No one's talking any crazy nonsense about, dictatorial rule. We're just going to suspend civil liberties for a little bit so we can sort this out and we can find out who else is in the German government that's a communist conspirator. And, you know the rest. Okay. Let us move to another incident, which also happened in Germany. This was called the Glitz Broadcasting Station Program. And in 1939, this whole operation was when, again, Nazi intelligence officers used the Glitz Station broadcast programming to broadcast anti-German and pro-Polish sentiments over German airways to the public, and this was done to support the 1939 invasion of Poland by Germany as a preemptive measure. So what happened was this broadcasting station at Glitz was a major radio broadcaster in Nazi Germany. They had people at the station broadcast anti-German, pro-Polish segments to lead people to believe that their country had already been infiltrated by Polish forces and that their government was on the brink of being overtaken. Of course, this was only done to sway public opinion back in the favor of Hitler's Germany so that they could justify a preemptive invasion of Poland and the public would support it, right? So like I said, right now in 2022, we have the war in Ukraine, right? And we now have literally 2 possible war crimes, atrocities committed within 2 weeks. And we have one side blaming the other. Why? It's because we want the public to support our side. And if the other side was the side that committed the war crimes, the atrocities, public opinion should go to us and we should get help from other countries. Okay. And last, in the World War II era, the Russian shelling of Manila, and this is not Manila in the Philippines, this is Manila, Mainila. And during this tragedy, Russian forces shelled their own city of Manila on the Finnish border. The USSR used the tragedy to justify the Winter War of 1939 by blaming Finland for the shelling. Years after Russia withdrew from Finland, Nikita Khrushchev admitted to knowledge of this false flag while he was in the USSR Army. Right. So, all right, this one's definitely very poignant right now. Russian forces shelled their own city in Manila to justify the winter war against Finland, which they ended up losing pretty badly, by the way. I think, like, back in the day, like, Finland, those guys were badasses. Russia invades Finland, and the Finns were taking, like, I don't know, 10 Russians for every guy they lost. It was literally 10 to 1 casualty rates. And Russia was just dumping fresh troops into Finland. They were getting cut up. But then, of course, World War II started with the German front, and Russia had to withdraw. But they shelled their own people to justify invading Finland. They wanted the Russian people to hear about this shelling, and they wanted them to believe that it was Finland that had attacked first, right? Oh, the Finns have just shelled Manila. Well, now we have to go into Finland because they're already killing our people. Russian sentiment, hearing this over the radio waves and through letters and newspapers, probably agreed that, well, you know, my government just said that the town bordering Finland was shelled by Finnish forces. Why would they lie about this? They're our government. Of course I support the war in Finland. Go get them. That was a false flag for sure. And Nikita Khrushchev, who later became president of the USSR, the premier, he admitted to knowing about it while he was in the military. Okay, let's jump to the post-war Cold War era, and this is where false flags get really intriguing. This is where all the great spy novels come from. Most of them are probably based off of real things that we don't even know about. But we come to America, and we see that there was a little operation known as Northwoods. 1962. U.S. Department of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff planned a series of terrorist attacks against American military and civilians around the United States, including in Washington, D.C., in order to blame the communist Cuban government and to later justify invasion into Cuba. President Kennedy learned of Operation Northwoods, rejected it, and allegedly fired Joint Chief Lemnitzer over the program. Okay, so Operation Northwoods, this is great CIA lore. If you really want to go down a rabbit hole, just Google Operation Northwoods and like look all the documents. A lot of it's been declassified. So the idea was, well, the Cuban government's communist, right? And the whole Bay of Pigs incident was embarrassing. But how do we justify invading Cuba? We can't just do it because, you know, the government there is communist. We have to have a reason. And so these knuckleheads at DOD and even the Joint Chiefs said, well, what if we just, planned a series of terrorist attacks around the United States and even in the Capitol in D.C., where there would be random shootings and bombings, and we would blame it on Cuban communist officers. How about that? Kennedy heard about it. He was like, no, that's not going to work. That's not going to happen. You're fired. A lot of people think that because of this decision, maybe certain people didn't like Kennedy anymore. And we know in 1963, that was the year he was assassinated. Again, I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories till the end, but a lot of people think that Operation Northwoods, Kennedy may have aggravated it or even personally offended people in the Department of Defense or the intelligence agencies because of canceling Northwoods, and it might have got him in trouble. Not going to get into that right now. But we'll go back a little bit and we'll go to Israel, the Lavon Affair. 1954. Pinchas Lavon, and the Israeli defense minister, came up with a plan for Israeli intelligence officers to bomb certain sites frequented by foreigners in Alexandria and Cairo, Egypt. The bombings, he planned, would be blamed on Egyptian radicals, and Lavon hoped it would ruin U.S. and UK relations with Egypt. Two men, Moshe Marzouk and Samuel Azar, were caught during the planning of the operation and confessed to it. They both were hanged, and Pinchas Lavon took the blame for the operation. Okay, yeah, so that was a black eye for Israel. The Lavon Affair is one of those, like, similar to Northwoods. We're going to bomb certain places in Alexandria and Cairo, and hopefully the bombings will be blamed on Egyptian separatists, and the United States and the UK will no longer be friendly with Egypt, and they'll be more friendly to Israel. Well, it was found out those two guys got pinched, they got hanged over it, and it didn't really ruin Egyptian relations with the US and the UK. People blame Pinus Lavon for that, but I mean, I think it was a few more people involved, just, him, of course, being the defense minister, but there were more people involved than just him. Okay. Now we move to the Cold War era, and we'll discuss the Mossadegh overthrow, 1953, so just before the Lavon Affair. In 1953, CIA and MI6 trained and equipped Iranian separatists who bombed a religious leader's home in Tehran with the objective of having the attack blamed on secular Iranians within Mossadegh's government. Ultimately, Prime Minister Mossadegh was deposed and the Shah of Iran was restored to power. The attack was launched as Mossadegh did not like the US and UK controlling Iran. Okay. This event definitely changed the course of history, definitely the course of Middle Eastern history. Mossadegh was a secular leader in Iran at the time, and he was very popular. In fact, there were a lot of secular leaders in the Middle East who rose to power in the post-World War II era. According to the CIA and MI6, Mossadegh was not keen on the United States and the UK meddling in Iranian affairs, or pretty much controlling them like a puppet state. So the CIA and MI6, in their infinite wisdom, says, hey, I got an idea. We'll launch terrorist attacks by training Iranians who are loyal to the Shah, and we'll just have those attacks blamed on Mossadegh. And it worked. And the Shah of Iran was restored to power, and Mossadegh lost. And Iran never went back to that kind of a secular track. It became a theocracy, right? So the Ayatollah and the Shah, they took over Iran. Ironic to look back now at Iran and say, yeah, we got rid of Mossadegh because he wasn't on board the USA train, so we put the Shah in power. Yeah, and then what happened? The Shah and Ayatollah became virulently anti-Western and anti-American. So, yeah, good job, fellas. That's how that one went. Okay, and the last one of the Cold War era is the Cypriot mosque bombing, 1970s. And I couldn't get an actual date, but it occurred sometime in the 70s. And in this incident, Turkish forces bombed a mosque on the island of Cyprus, and that mosque burned down. Years later, former Turkish general, and I got this name, Sabri Yirmibesoglu, yeah, I'm going to put it up so you can read it. This general admitted that this was done to blame on Greece and motivate Cyprus to invite Turkey to intervene. Okay, so again, Turkish forces in Cyprus bomb and burn down a mosque and wanted to do this for the purposes of blaming it on Greece, which at the time is mostly Orthodox Christian. The Turkish general said it was done in an effort to get Cyprus to invite Turkey in so that Turkey could become friends with Cyprus and possibly lead to greater conflict with Greece and have Cyprus on their side. Interesting, Turkey is a Muslim country, and they decide to bomb and burn down a mosque for what? Political reasons, right? Warfare is the Tao of deception, right? You are only limited to what you are capable of doing. And in this case, Turkey had no issue in bombing and burning down a mosque, a place of worship for their religion, if it meant winning the favor of Cyprus and possibly justifying future war with Greece. Okay, Now let's move to the modern era, and this would be 2001 to the present, the War on Terror era. Okay, and I just have pretty much one for these. And it was the U.S. Anthrax Attacks. This was between 2002 and 2004. And I remember this because I was in school during it. And during this series of incidents, letters containing anthrax were mailed to news outlets and to U.S. Senators Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy. 5 people died and 17 were infected but later recovered. U.S. Department of Defense and media blamed the attacks on the Taliban to further promote the U.S. war in Afghanistan and later Iraq as evidence of weapons of mass destructions. Later investigation determined the anthrax spores in the letters were military grade and had actually been mailed by a nutcase scientist by the name of Bruce Ivins, who was an anthrax research scientist in the U.S. Okay, so everybody remembers that famous testimony that Colin Powell gave, where he held up that little vial of powder and said that vial of powder, if it were anthrax, would be enough to kill everybody in the building. Vladimir Putin actually referenced that testimony that Colin Powell gave in his Empire of Lies speech, because it was a lie, right? These letters were mailed within the United States. 5 people did die, but it wasn't sent by the Taliban, and it wasn't one of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. It was some nut, some lone wolf crazy named Bruce Ivins, who was an anthrax research scientist, who decided to mail them. Is that really true? Do we know who this Bruce Ivins guy is? Has he ever, said anything publicly, or do we have any kind of case history on him? No. But don't worry, we got him, and everyone's safe now. But the U.S. war in Afghanistan and Iraq went forward, and literally 15 years later, it finally came to an end. Okay, now we jump to some conspiracy theory stuff. And these are false flags that may have happened or may not have happened, but I thought they were worth mentioning because while we're on the topic, it's worth considering, especially, as I said, what's going on today in Eastern Europe. Okay, for the first conspiracy theory, unconfirmed, in the 1960s was Operation Gladio. And Gladio was a CIA, my voice is correct, a CIA, MI6, and NATO staged series of events where the operation would use terror attacks throughout Europe and the USSR to blame on the Soviet government. So the theory was, if there was a terrorist attack anywhere in Europe or in the Soviet Union, it was going to be used to blame on the Soviet Union. How many of those terror attacks that occurred between 1960 and 1991 can be attributed to Operation Gladio? Some people say all of them, some people say maybe just a few, but a lot of people have theorized that Operation Gladio has transitioned in the modern era to support the war on terror. So when you see Islamic terrorism going on throughout the world, especially in Europe, people say that's possibly a Gladio cell. That Operation Gladio is still in operation, and the purpose of this is to constantly keep these countries afraid of some boogeyman, whether it's the USSR or whether it's radical Islam, so that they can always justify going to war to address it somewhere in the world. Again, conspiracy theory. Do I believe it? Maybe. Okay, now let's go way back in time. The Lusitania. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915. At this time, in World War I, Germans were threatening to sink all foreign ships sailing into their controlled waters, which would have been the North Atlantic. Despite numerous warnings and even an English printed ad in U.S. newspapers, the RMS Lusitania sailed from New York City to Liverpool, England. German U-boat U-20 sunk the Lusitania with one torpedo off the coast of Ireland. 1,193 of the 1,960 aboard died, and the sinking was used in the media to turn public opinion against Germany that eventually convinced the U.S. to join allies in World War II. Okay, this is a conspiracy theory. It's a popular one too, that the U.S. government needed a reason to get into World War I. They couldn't just justify going to help Europe because, well, we're friendly nations with them. They wanted something concrete. And the sinking of the Lusitania was that flashpoint. I actually looked it up too, and I'll post it up. The German embassy in D.C. actually posted warnings in the newspapers, like advertisements saying, warnings to all commercial and merchant ships sailing on the Atlantic. Do not sail in this region or you will be sunk by German aircraft or watercraft. They warned U.S. ships from sailing these waters because they told them, listen, we're in a war here, and if we see a vessel in these waters and we can't identify it as German, we're going to assume it's hostile and sink it. The conspiracy theory is the U.S. government knew this, and they said, well, why don't we just let the Lusitania sail into those waters, and then once they're sunk, we can blame it on Germany, and that'll get us in the war. Kind of a false flag, but it's almost like walking your own people off to a tragedy and, waving goodbye as they go and saying, yeah, once they're sunk, we'll give a press conference and then we'll justify going to the war. A lot of people believe that this is what happened, and this is the conspiracy theory that the Lusitania was allowed to sail into this disaster by the U.S. government because they wanted something to give them the pretext, the reason to go into World War I. Okay. Now we'll jump forward a bit to a different war, and we go to the Gulf of Tonkin incident. This is 1964. And in 1964, the North Vietnamese launched 3 torpedo boats against 2 U.S. destroyers and 1 aircraft carrier in the Gulf of Tonkin. The USS Maddox fired warning shots on the NVA torpedo boats. Gunfire was exchanged between both sides. In the end, 4 North Vietnamese sailors died and 6 were wounded. The USS Maddox suffered superficial damage. Despite this pretty brief skirmish, U.S. Congress decided to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, and Lyndon Baines Johnson used the resolution to commit U.S. support to South Vietnam, and you could essentially say this was the beginning of the Vietnam War. Right, so the Gulf of Tonkin, why were we there to begin with? Well, again, the Lusitania was sailed into this region in the North Atlantic, and there were U-boats that were patrolling it, and the U-boats were under orders: if you see a ship that's not German, sink it. Why was the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin with these other destroyers and aircraft carriers? Who knows? But the NVA torpedo boats go out there to address them. The Maddox opened fires on them, kills 4 of those guys, and I think the Maddox suffered like 3 or 4 bullet holes from the North Vietnamese boats. Like really superficial damage. But despite this, this like lack of it, I mean, if you want to say it was an incident, it was pretty much a loss for the North Vietnamese. But Congress used it to pass a resolution, and it gave LBJ enough ammunition to go and throw American support behind South Vietnam. And then once he did that, we committed more and more troops to the region, and before you know it, the Vietnam War kicked off. Okay, that's a conspiracy theory as well. There's nothing to say that we deliberately sent the USS Maddox into fire and drew the NVA fire and used that to justify the Vietnam War, but a lot of people think that's exactly what we did. Looking at the Lusitania and the Gulf of Tonkin together, an argument can be made. And lastly, we have 9/11 Building 7, 2001. So in 2001, of course, the 9/11 tragedy took place on September 11th. 7 World Trade Center was hit by debris falling from the north and south towers, buildings 1 and 2. According to reports, the debris that rained down on Building 7 caused enough damage that a fire resulted in World Trade Center 7, and Trade Center 7 collapsed. This is the first steel skyscraper to have collapsed primarily due to uncontrolled fires. Right. Okay. This is tinfoil hat stuff now. Google World Trade Center 7, Building 7. Just type in Building 7, and you will see video footage of the building collapsing despite the fact that World Trade Center 1 and 2 had already fully collapsed. So according to the reports, debris and whatnot rained down on World Trade Center 7 and started fires on the main lobby floors of Building 7. And these fires were enough to damage the steel construction of World Trade Center 7 to fully collapse it. And that's the first time that's ever happened. So, yeah. Is that really what happened? Who's to say? Conspiracy theory, but we know what happened after 9/11. The war on terror kicked off, and it's been nothing but chaos and bloodshed in the Middle East for nearly 20 years since 9/11. Did a false flag help kick it off? Possibly. But regardless of all that, I want you all to think about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. You have to look back at history to understand the present and to forecast the future. What is going on right now in Ukraine and Russia is lamentable, but when one side starts to lose or they believe they're on the brink of losing, they will resort to things that are unorthodox. And that might include false flags, even if those false flags are evidence of self-harm. So that's all I have for today. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Apologies for my voice cracking there in between a few of these readings from history, but it's important to understand the perspective that we are in, because years from now, people will look back at 2022, what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, the sanctions war, the currency wars, and they'll be able to make a lot more sense of it than we'll be able to in the here and now. But that shouldn't stop us from trying. Okay. Once again, the Hoplite channel. If you're liking the content, please leave a thumbs up or a subscription. Preferably both if you haven't done it. And yeah, we will see you back here next time. And yeah, till then, take care.